And viewers, now getting into our conversations this morning, we're going to get things kicked off talking about what's been happening in the tourism space. We just come from a long weekend, and there's another long weekend this month. Of course, it's Easter and all of that. So a lot of exciting times here in Tobago, but what's really going on? So we are being joined this morning by the president of the Tobago Hotel and Tourism Association, and that is Mr. Alpha Lorde. So good morning and welcome to you, Mr. Lorde. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm quite fine, thank you. And how are you keeping?
I'm good. Rested and good. Ready to
That's
go.
nice.
So now, in the midst of all our elections and all that drama that's surrounding that, we still have a tourism industry to keep going.
Yes.
How has things been for the first quarter of the year?
It has been slow. Obviously, the impact of the SOE has slowed down the international travel, but we've also had some bright moments coming off the back of this weekend was one of them, where we've seen a lot of the domestic traffic from Trinidad come in, but we've also seen some bright spots around our international market as well.
What can we expect, as the year continues? So, and I guess hopefully we will hear later on this month the official end of this SOE, because of course Parliament has been dissolved, so they can't go to renew it for another 3 months or whatever.
Correct.
So what's the prospects looking like?
I think we're going to have to go back into our source markets and represent ourselves. I know there's been some communication from the various tourism authorities, TTAL here, TL in Trinidad, indicating that, we're open for business, but our international partners are here in SOE and here in Open for Business, and they're listening to the government on the SOE side. So I think we'll have to get back in there and forcefully emphasize that has gone, continue to put forward our best case for selling Tobago, and work with our partners to get reinvigorated interest in the destination, because a lot of the partners they have a responsibility to their clients who they're bringing to Tobago. So they felt, it's in their best interest not to necessarily push Tobago at this time, given the SOE. So now that we know that's coming to an end, we expect to see that push coming once again from all our tour partners.
And how are things on the domestic market? Because of course we just had a long weekend. We have Easter coming up, and Easter is usually one of our most booming times.
The domestic market continues to be an absolutely strong provider for business to the destination, right? The challenge with the domestic market is weekend only traffic or around the long weekends, holidays, etc. So the consistency of it is directly related to how often we have a long weekend, right? For the industry to survive itself, it has to be consistency around the 7 days of the week, right? So, and hence the international partners are required to fill that gap. But in terms of the domestic markets, continues to be strong and continues to be very supportive.
And then, of course, with the opening of the new airports, or I should say, they're getting ready to open because we haven't officially put it into use yet. I know you would have also been part of the communications going out to the different trade shows to sort of invigorate our airlift and so on, or encourage more airlift to the destination. How has that been going now that we have this new airports?
Well, the new airport terminal is without a doubt a positive thing and a plus, but it's not the end all and be all of solving the situation. We have product issues in terms of we have some properties and plants on the island that definitely need to do their homework. We have marketing challenges, and then we have a relationship with Caribbean Airlines that isn't necessarily in the strongest place relative to the amount of airlift we want to see coming out of Trinidad. So all of these things add up to the sum total output that we're looking for from our tourism product, right? So the airport terminal is definitely going to be an enhancer to that product overall, but there are other pieces that we need to work together on as well.
Now, one of the things that was said just a week ago at a plenary sitting from the Tourism Secretary, Ms. Sashir Boris, was that in conversations, they've had lots of conversations with CAL about increasing flights, whether it's domestically or even internationally.
Correct.
However, it seems as though even though CAL is willing, there is a political barrier to whether or not CAL can execute those things. What can you share from
The
your
political
perspectives?
conversation I can't contribute to at all. The secretary would know why she's saying that. But what I feel strongly about is CAL's inability to act is affecting our tourism product, right? We've had several conversations with them about a flight out of Toronto, which we felt was making some very good headway, and then it stalled out. My understanding is that the THA, for all intents and purposes, had agreed to most of, if not all of the contract terms, and then it died. These are the things that affect us on a daily basis. So my expectation is that CAL would somehow find its way back to the table, not only on the Toronto flight, but how it could just overall improve airlift into Tobago out of Trinidad and a couple North American destinations. So we have the JFK flight right now. I'd love to see a second JFK flight. The North American market very rarely travel for 7 days at a time. So when you have a flight that coming in 1 day for the week, it means the person is either staying 7 days or have to travel back through Trinidad, which we know can be complicated. So I think I'd love to see a second JFK flight. I'd love to see that Toronto flight come off the ground. And I'd feel a whole lot more comfortable if we can ramp back up to, if not all of the pre-COVID flights on the air bridge, at least to 80% of where we were, 90% of where we were previously.
And of course, and I think every one of us here in Tobago would love to see more of those flights added
Definitely.
on. So, because for us, it's a lifeline.
Yeah, and it does not have to be every single day of the week. It could be very strategic in that we know the weekends tend to be a little more demand, so let's increase the load on the weekends, coming in and going out, right? Until you reach a place where financially it makes more sense for you to add additional days. But the weekends is without a doubt, we need the support.
And what's been the feeling on the ground with the tourism players, talking about accommodation and so on? What are they feeling as the year continues? Even though we've had the setback with the SOE and things like that, how are people viewing the rest of the year?
I think most persons realistically are concerned. I think most persons, the SOE started the year in a poor manner, and it has set the tone for the outlook right now. Because the reality is we've lost what is our strongest time of the year, which is winter in terms of the European, North American market. And the advertising that would have been necessary during this time for the summer market didn't take place. So it's really hard to stand up here and say, well, okay, we've done the first quarter, we have 3 quarters in front of us, and we should be able to knock them out of the park. That's not possible. So I think it's with a little trepidation, but everybody's at least at a minimum excited that the SOE is gone, and we could actually get to attempting to do some real work.
Have you been able to tabulate how much cancellations we've had because of the SOE?
I think what we've had is a significant slowdown in demand versus cancellations. Now, persons have had cancellations without a doubt. But I think if you looked at where we were in December and you kind of checked the booking pace, you'd realize by the first week of January, it had just fallen off the cliff, right? And then people just, I'm not booking. And it's hard to quantify the person who would have decided to come to Tobago as compared to Grenada or Barbados, but decided to go there because of the SOE, because you just don't know where they were going to go. But when you compare it year on year, you can see the slide.
What do you think about just the political conversation around what's been happening in tourism? Because I know that the politics, they're going to throw their words here and there for their own own advancements, but how much do you think that those conversations hurt what's really going on in the tourism industry and helping everybody to understand?
So the conversation, when it starts to become mindless, it hurts the product completely. it's good to have a spirited debate to say, well, I agree with this or I disagree with that, because then people get to see different sides of the conversation. But when it starts to become non-factual, right, or it doesn't address some of the real issues that affect people on a daily basis, and it's more hyperbole than anything else, I think that's where the difficulty comes in, right? What I would like to see is, okay, for example, the sandals conversation, broaden more than sandals and just talk about development. What is the development plan relative to tourism? Like, how many 200 plus bedroom hotels we would like to attract that's carrying an international flag or that has international accreditation. So if we say that's the program, then we know we want to get 250 plus bedroom hotels that's carrying a flag. Let's have a conversation around that. If sandals happen to be one of those, great. But the fact is, we've decided this is what we want to attract. We want to attract 1,000 high quality rooms to the island. This is why. This is what we intend to provide as a destination in terms of concessions, and this is what we expect to gain. And then set up a framework that anybody who meets that criteria could apply to it and get in. Just limiting the conversation to one entity versus having a conversation around Tobago tourism development makes all the difference in the world to me.
Now, and again, as you touch on sandals, we know that there's been conversations happening with the management of sandals. What can you share as to whether or not you guys are involved in those conversations, and what are your views?
Well, no, we're not involved, and rightfully so at this time. I think it's more a government conversation at this time, because obviously there's a measure of agreements that have to take place, concessions, etc. I think it becomes a hotel association and a tourism body conversation as we decide how we're going to link not just hotel to hotel, but how we're going to link the benefits that sandals or any other international brand can make to the rest of the industry. Because what you don't want is a brand comes in, sucks up all the positivity that they could suck up, and then the other partners on the island don't benefit from it, right? We have 2 golf courses on the island. You want to be able to see those 2 golf courses at performing maximum thing. You have farmers on the island, you want to see those farmers benefiting from it. So the linkages with the rest of the industry, the taxi association, the dive association, the water sports people, you want to understand how those things could connect. And I think once we've crossed the macro level in terms of the government sandals, where they agree on the concessions and stuff like that, then we start to, on a hotel association, link those things. And I want to say also that the concessions that we make available to new/international/foreign players, we should be considering how we make some of those concessions available to the local players so that they could reinvigorate their properties as well.
Yes, and I know one of the concerns that you've expressed in previous conversations is that a lot of the hotels here in Tobago, they're sort of at a catch-22 position where there's a lot of upgrades and so on that they have to do, but they're not being able to attract enough guests to make enough profit to reinvest into their properties. Correct. So it's like trying to decide what is the better focus.
Yeah, who comes first? Which one do I do? Do I go and restore my property fully and then wait on that business to come, or do we get that business and then I restore my property, but at which point in time the customers come and not satisfied with the product? I think they kind of go hand in hand. And this is where I believe the efforts of the government in terms of marketing and pushing the island comes largely into play. Because if I see a concerted effort, if I see a structure, if I see a plan, if I see a strategy, then I have something to hedge my bets on.
When would you say was the last time that we had such a plan in place that you all could feel confident?
Going back a few years. And the reality is the macroeconomics has changed. So what worked then may not necessarily work now. But what we know was crucial to what worked then was a steering committee of stakeholders that worked behind a single agenda. And the quite honest truth is that steering committee, especially in a small island state like Tobago, is always going to be driven by the efforts of the government. Stakeholders, private entities like ourselves will always want to get involved, will always want to do stuff, but we don't have necessarily the full clout to do it or lead it ourselves. So it needs a more vigorous input on a government level to say, you know what, this tourism industry matters to us, and this is what we're going to do. Get the stakeholders together, understand the needs. This is the committee that's going to lead this, and sets clear objectives.
Especially with the conversation that's going to be happening very soon with sandals.
Yeah, and let's not forget that there is an EIA in process right now for the Marriott project at Rocky Point. So based on the outcome of that, that also becomes a conversation piece, right? So now you are talking about two fairly international players, two large players. Where does the rest of the industry fit into that? How do we integrate those two things? How do we attract more? What is the threshold that we're trying to get to, and then say, okay, for now, this is the cap we want on development, or this is where we want the development to focus now that we've developed this area, because those two projects talk about the southwest of the island, right? But there's a whole island otherwise. So what is the strategy up in the east, right? What is the strategy to develop Castara more, if it needs developing more? And when I say develop, I'm not necessarily talking about infrastructure in terms of buildings, but infrastructure in terms of technology. Does it need it? You know, all these are pieces that add to the value of the island, and it should be part of some master framework.
What do you see for the future of Tobago's tourism, especially with there is one push to get these bigger branded hotels here in Tobago, and of course we know there are lots of benefits that come along with it in terms of marketing and airlift and all that so on stuff. But then there's also this argument that perhaps we should be pushing for a community-based tourism product like Castara and a lot of these other smaller communities where we could have that emphasis on experience more than a grand hotel stay.
And who said the two can't exist in the same space? Right? I think there's room for the two to exist in the same space. What happens in the southwest of the island isn't what happens in the northeast of the island, right? It's not what happens in Castara. And persons are looking for different things, right? So you could attract a visitor here who wants the energy of the southwest, and you can also attract a visitor here who wants to go diving, who wants to go bird watching. The reality is we have multiple different things. It's how we create a coordinated balance of delivering those things. You don't want to overdevelop the island. I'm not one who says develop and do this and do this and do this and do it everywhere. There's some places on the island that the specific nature of how it is specifically what somebody's coming to see, and we shouldn't ruin that. But then there's some parts of the island that definitely needs infrastructure development works, right? And you also have people who will come here and say, I would prefer to stay in a 4-star, 5-star property and go and visit the rest of the island. And then you have people who will come here and say, you know what, the Castara model is exactly what I want, or I want to stay in a bed and breakfast somewhere. So there is room for everybody to participate. What you don't want is overdevelopment of one area at the expense of the next, right? And then there's infrastructure, telephone, technology, utilities, all of those things that is consistently needed throughout the island. So that there's nothing says that I need to figure out what my tourism model is before I put these things in, because regardless of the model, those things are necessary.
And how much this disconnect between the THA and the central government has been affecting the ability of the industry to really get going?
I'm not going to make it a central government v THA thing. I'm going to say the policy makers. So because sometimes central government and the THA line up, and then there are times like it is right now. And so when you look at it when it was the same party, when you look at it as it is now, the fact is the overall strategy is missing. The overarching strategy that says, this is the level or the direction, this is how we want to focus the development. That is missing. Having the branding is great, but the development to support that branding is missing. The strategy to support that, the decision of how much airlift you're going to pay for and or not pay for, all of those things come at a cost. And there's never been sufficient funding to support those things. So it's not the disconnect that exists right now, it's the absence of a strategy that everybody can agree on. Or at least, if not everybody agree on, there's a plurality of people that says this is the direction that we're going in.
And then, has there been any sort of conversation, even from the central government level, after we heard at the opening ceremony, that there is more airlift that's coming into the country, but we haven't really heard anything for Tobago?
I think
there was a lot mentioned.
I think, to be quite honest, since the opening, we've essentially gone into election footing. And you're going to hear a lot now, you're going to see a lot now. I think we're going to have to wait and see, post the election, what is actually really a deliverable that can be stood upon. Who's going to be the new government at that time, what direction they're going to go in, how they're going to engage with stakeholders. And what you've also had is, you've had a shift in leadership in terms of Prime Minister Lorde is now retired. You have Prime Minister Stuart Young in. What is his focus? What is his development agenda? All of those things that need to be examined. And given that we literally moved from A to B and then to elections, I think the reality of what is possible will be known after the elections.
And as you mentioned just a little bit ago, of course, as maybe voters themselves, like, as you think about what's being said by the various political interests, the focus should not just be on deliverables, but also the strategy for tourism.
Well, the reality is, outside of the THA, the next single largest employer in Tobago is the industry.
Yeah.
In one form or the other. And I think everybody who's impacted on a day-to-day basis by the industry should be asking, what is the strategy? How are you going to make this stronger? How are you going to make this better for me? And hear the answers that come at you. See what's realistic, what makes sense. And some of us have different perspectives. Some people want to see Tobago remain in a particular place, and that's not to say backward or anything like that. No, just stay pristine, stay quality. I love the idea of the amount of greenery that you see in Tobago on a consistent basis. So I don't want to see that go away, right? I love the drive to go up to Charlottesville. I don't want to see that become overdeveloped. But at the same point in time, when I watch the southwest of the island and I watch Crown Point, I say, my gosh, this is not what it's supposed to be like. This should have a different framework, more standards for what you erect, how you erect it, where you erect it. So I think anybody who's affected by or impacted on a daily basis by the tourism industry should be asking themselves, what is the strategy here, right? And how do I align to it? Am I hearing the right thing from X, or am I hearing the wrong thing?
All right, so definitely certain things to consider as we go forward. But that's all we have for our conversation this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on with us. But viewers, don't go anywhere, because we got a lot more coming up for you after the break.
It's a brand new morning, rise up to a brand new dawning.